Ever wonder why you should never pop a pimple? Why we get brain freeze? What those eye floaty things really are? Stick around for a whole host of incredible facts about the human body, each one even more mind-blowing than the last. If there's one question most of us would like answered, it's this one. What happens to us when we die? I might not be able to give you a definitive answer, but I can tell you one thing. You'll probably still get goosebumps. Spooky, right? In the first few hours after we die, all the joints and muscles in our body stiffen through a little process called rigor mortis, which can leave us looking like scarecrows. Muscle relaxation relies on a compound known as adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, and when this is depleted, it causes contraction instead. When that happens, millions of hair follicles, home to muscles known as erector pili, also contract, causing tiny depressions we know as goosebumps. Either that or being locked in a room full of other dead people causes a chain reaction where each corpse is scared of one another. A lot of gross stuff happens when we die too. We bloat, twitch a bit, and start to smell like a rotten foot. But something strange happens to your eyes too. They flatten. As your pupils become unresponsive to direct light and dilate, they also start to cloud over as potassium in the red blood cells break down. This process can take up to 3 hours, but because most people actually die with their eyes open, it's usually pretty speedy. When this happens, your eyeballs will also start to flatten and deflate like an old grape that's been left in the fruit bowl too long. To try and recreate the natural curvature of the eye, morticians can use special eye caps which go over the flattened eyeball to make sure you're looking tip-top for the big day. Your funeral, that is. On other occasions, tissue builder can also be injected directly into the eye to try and fill it back up. Seems kinda gross, right? Without any of these measures, open casket funerals would be a very different affair and would probably feature corpses with spooky sunken holes instead of eyes. So, let's be thankful. While still among the living, humans are capable of lots of things, but humming and holding our noses at the same time is not one of them. The simple explanation is the same reason you can't exhale while holding your nose and closing your mouth, because there's nowhere for the air to escape from. To create a humming noise, air must pass through your larynx, also known as your voice box, but it's impossible for this to happen when your lips are tightly sealed. As a result, you may be able to hum for a couple of seconds, but you'll eventually have to open your mouth and catch your breath. Go ahead, try it. Picture this. You wake up for your first day of school, stumble over to the mirror, and freeze. Staring right back at you is a mountainous, bright red pimple. What do? Pop it, of course. For many people, there's nothing quite as satisfying as popping a ripe pimple. But news just in, it's a really bad idea. You might be thinking, but what about those professional pimple poppers on TV? When performed properly, extractions can clear certain types of pimples, but bad techniques combined with attempts to pick non-pickable pimples can be a total recipe for disaster. You see, acne is your body's response to blocked pores and bacteria. The red bump you see on your skin is actually the body's way of saying, hey, I'm doing something about it, leave it alone. When you pop a pimple, you're forcefully pushing the contents, bacteria, oil, and debris out of the bump, tearing the skin and creating a fresh wound in the process. Instead of fixing the problem, you might even end up forcing some of that nasty goop down even further into the skin, which will only result in an even larger pimple. Plus, you're inevitably introducing new bacteria and dirt from your finger as you press on the zit. As if all that wasn't bad enough already, that oh-so-satisfying pop could spawn more spots as the bacteria, oil, and debris is spread onto the skin. All these things can also increase your risk of leaving a scar, which is going to hang around far longer than the pimple ever would have. I'd stick to watching pimple popping videos online from now on. This might come as a surprise. After all, most babies come out screaming and crying from the get-go, but newborns can't actually cry real tears. This is because we're not immediately born with functioning tear ducts, which usually don't develop until we're somewhere between 2 weeks and 2 months old. Tears are produced by the almond-shaped lacrimal glands under our eyelids. They come down over our eyes, and the tear ducts in the corners then act as a handy drainage system to release them onto our cheeks, like a glass of water overflowing. Scientists aren't really sure why this system isn't in place straight away, but most babies definitely make up for it once those ducts open up. One of the earliest signs that you're coming down with a common cold might be a stuffed up nose, and usually one nostril feels suspiciously more blocked than the other. This is thanks to a mind-blowing process called the nasal cycle, which happens constantly but only becomes apparent when you're sick. You may never notice, but you're always breathing more heavily from one nostril than the other, because they switch sides throughout the day. The body inflates tissues with blood to open one side of your nose and partly close the other every 3 to 6 hours so that they work in regular shifts. This system is thought to round out our sense of smell because some smells are better picked up by fast-flowing air through the nose, while others are detected with slow-moving air. A constant stream of air through both nostrils would also dry out and kill the tiny hairs which protect us from foreign contaminants. This subtle process is amplified when you're sick because the nostril that is effectively turned off feels way more clogged than the other. Our bodies create all sorts of secretions we try not to dwell on in daily life. One of these is saliva, which you probably don't notice until you suddenly become aware just how much of the stuff constantly coats your tongue and mouth. Its primary purpose is to moisten food for digestion, and that means your body needs to have it on tap. Everyone produces different amounts based on factors like age, lifestyle, and fitness, but the general range is thought to be anywhere between 0.75 to 1.5 liters per day. In just 1 year, that's 273.75 or 547.5 liters. Why stop there though? Let's say the average person lives for 80 years. That means your salivary glands could produce a maximum of 43,800 liters of the stuff in your lifetime, which is about as much as you'd need for a backyard swimming pool. Don't get any ideas though. Can you imagine diving into drool at first? Some say a fear of bees is irrational. After all, the world would come to a total standstill without them. But you might want to think twice before getting too up close and personal after you hear this terrifying story. In April 2019, a 28-year-old Taiwanese woman was pulling weeds around a relative's grave as part of the Qingming Tomb Sweeping Festival when she felt what she thought was a piece of dirt get into her eye. After her eye quickly swelled up, Miss He visited the doctor, who spotted what looked like a tiny insect leg sticking out. Dr. Hong Chi-ting was shocked to pull a 4-millimeter long bee out of her eye. But that wasn't all. This little stinger was shortly followed by 3 more bees, all of which were totally alive and kicking. This type of bee, called Halictidae, are smaller than your standard bumblebee and are sometimes known as sweat bees because they feast on human sweat or tears as a source of protein. Dr. Ting believes they may have been blown in by a sudden gust of wind, but how Mrs. He didn't notice them crawling around beneath her eyelid is just as baffling as it is cringe-inducing. But would you believe that bugs in your orifices are more common than you'd think? Have you ever felt a little tickle inside of your ear and had the sudden fear that some creepy crawly may have found its way in? Usually it's nothing more than internal hairs inside brushing against the ear canal, but for one man in China in 2019, it was something truly nightmarish. After he noticed a painful itchiness deep within his ear canal, the concerned fellow visited an ear specialist who was shocked by what he discovered inside. More than 10 baby cockroaches were squirming around inside the ear, as well as the mother who'd laid her eggs between the fleshy walls. Thankfully, the earhole lodging family were quickly removed before they could get properly settled in. The specialist strongly advised his patient not to leave any food near his bedside in the future, as this habit seemed to be what had attracted cockroaches near his sleeping head. After such a horrific experience, I doubt he needed to be told twice. You might feel an immense sense of pride after passing a monumental turd, but what I'm about to tell you about the world's actual longest poop will scare the crap out of you. Literally. Back in February 1995, an unnamed woman from the city of Ann Arbor in Michigan decided it was her duty to set such a record. And boy did she commit. To ensure her digestive health was in tip-top condition, nutritionists from the University of Michigan first placed the woman on a super fiber-rich diet. Instead of relying on pure willpower to hold it all in, she was also fitted with a specially designed butt plug that would prevent any premature excretions. After a week of painful endurance, the time had finally come. The record-breaking poop was the length of the woman's entire colon, at a massive 26 feet long, and was passed in one uninterrupted sitting. The best part? The event took place at the Cranbrook Kingswood High School bowling alley in Bloomfield Hills because it was the only surface long enough to measure it in. They say the smell has haunted the alley ever since. Picture this. You're about to leave the house when you realize you've forgotten your keys in your bedroom. You dash upstairs to grab them, but the minute you enter the room, you forget what you went there for in the first place. It turns out it's not just plain old forgetfulness. This phenomenon actually has a name: the doorway effect. According to University of Notre Dame psychology professor Gabriel Radvansky, passing through doorways serves as an event boundary in the mind, which separates episodes of activity. Basically, recalling a decision or activity that was made in another room is difficult because it's essentially been compartmentalized and filed away elsewhere in your brain. Radvansky conducted an experiment to prove the theory and published his findings in 2011 in the Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology. Test subjects picked up shapes on a table, carried them to another room, and then swapped them for a different object. After repeating this in an environment with no doorway, Radvansky's team found that people forgot things more frequently when doors were involved. This led him to conclude that our brains use certain boundaries as markers of sorts, and doorways cause us to process one task and immediately class it as done. The average man is home to about 1.8 milligrams of belly button fluff at any time. But what exactly is it, and how does it get there? Dr. George Steinhauser spent 3 years of his life examining this strange phenomena so that you don't have to, duh. And here are the answers. Steinhauser discovered that the main culprit for this buildup of fluff is a previously unknown type of hair, which is unusually fine with little barbed hooks on it. As these barbs rub against clothing and dislodge bits of cotton and lint, the hair's concentric formation acts as a funnel, which brings the bits of fluff inwards to collect in the navel. This lint is also joined by a delightful cocktail of house dust, flakes of dead skin, fat, proteins, and sweat. I know what you're thinking. Gross. But what's the point? Well, that part's a little less clear. Dr. Steinhauser theorizes that these specialized fluff-catching hairs were a deliberate attempt by the body to clean itself. The little bits of cloth are accumulated to create an enticing object for us to manually remove and flick away, cleaning a possible breeding ground for bacteria in the process. That's right, people. Pick that belly button fluff to your heart's content. For men, having an Adam's apple, that weird hard lump that bobs up and down in the neck, is just a fact of life. But why don't women have them too? Its nickname refers to the part in the Bible where Adam eats the forbidden fruit and gets part of it stuck in his throat. However, the Adam's apple is also known as the thyroid cartilage because, well, it's a piece of cartilage that sits atop the thyroid gland. What you probably don't know is that both boys and girls start out with similarly sized thyroid cartilage, but that all changes when puberty hits. As their testosterone levels increase and their voices get lower, boys' larynx or voice box becomes enlarged, causing the Adam's apple to protrude. But what does it do exactly? Well, much like the cartilage in your ears or nose, thyroid cartilage has no medical purpose, other than being a dead ringer for when a guy is lying to his wife about his whereabouts the night before. That's right, the Adam's apple has a particular tendency to jump uncontrollably when you're nervous. If you value your sleep, now might be the time to cover your ears. Your eyelashes are probably home to a horde of tiny bugs as we speak, but don't go pulling them all out just yet. Eyelash mites are actually pretty normal, and they're usually harmless. Here's everything you need to know. There are two types of eyelash mites, Demodex folliculorum and Demodex brevis, and both can be found around the eyelash follicles where they lay their eggs. Here they feed on the mucus, sebum, and oils that we secrete from our facial pores and glands surrounding the eyes. The good news is you won't be able to spot them just by looking in the mirror. You need a scientific magnifier to see one of these puppies up close. Although there's a solid chance you've got a troop of these little mites in your eyelashes right now, some people may have more eyelash mites than others, particularly if you have really oily skin or make a habit out of sleeping in makeup. They'll also be more attracted to you if you have a condition like blepharitis, which causes swelling, irritation, and redness around the eyes. It's definitely an unsettling thought, but the truth is that there's not much you can do about it. Time to start charging rent. Here's a nugget of information that's sure to turn your whole life upside down. We're not exactly naked in the womb. About 4 months into a normal pregnancy, when the fetus is about 5.3 inches long and weighs around 6 ounces, something totally bizarre happens. It grows a mustache. Fine hair starts forming on the upper lip, and over the next month or so, it spreads to cover the entire body. This soft hairy coat is known as lanugo, and it affects both boys and girls equally. So yes, even Beyonce had a mustache once. Supposedly, it helps regulate babies' body temperatures as well as help protect our sensitive skin from amniotic fluid in the womb. At about 33 to 36 weeks in, we then shed this woolly coat like a snakeskin hair by tiny hair. But where does it all go? Well, the short answer is, we eat it. By the time the baby is born, the lanugo has been totally absorbed or swallowed by the baby, leaving us with nothing but a small amount of hair on our heads, eyebrows, and eyelashes known as vellus hair. As we mature, the body replaces vellus with coarser pigmented hair called terminal hair, which is our adult body hair. Imagine how different life would be if we all popped out looking like woolly mammoths. Hiccups are one of the most annoying things we have to put up with. No matter how many so-called remedies you try, it's usually best to wait until they disappear naturally. But what if that moment was decades away? On one spring afternoon in 1922, a young farmhand named Charles Osborne was weighing a hog on his farm when he suddenly started hiccuping. Osborne tried every trick in the book to cure himself of the sudden ailment, but to no avail. Days turned into weeks, months, and eventually years, but Osborne continued hiccuping for 68 years until they suddenly vanished in 1990, the same year he died at age 97. This incredible feat earned him a spot in the official Guinness World Records for the longest hiccuping attack, and his title is unbeaten to this day. During the first few decades, he reportedly hiccuped up to 40 times per minute, but that eventually slowed to 20 times per minute in later years. In total, he hiccuped an estimated 430 million times in his lifetime, so the next time you get frustrated about your hiccups not going away, spare a thought for poor old Mr. Osborne. What if I told you the Smurfs aren't as fictional as you might think? Once upon a time in Kentucky, there lived an entire family of people with blue skin who became known as the Fugates of Troublesome Creek. It all began in 1820 when a French orphan named Martin Fugate and his wife Elizabeth Smith moved onto the banks of Troublesome Creek, a beautiful area in Appalachian, Kentucky. Both Martin and Elizabeth carried a recessive gene causing a rare diaphragmase deficiency that led to methemoglobinemia, a blood disorder which causes an abnormal amount of methemoglobin to be produced, giving skin a bluish hue. The Fugates had 7 children and 4 of them were blue-skinned. The thing is, inbreeding was a pretty common occurrence in the isolated Appalachian region, and as Fugate descendants married other Fugate descendants, the gene became more concentrated through generations. Luna Fugate was one of the bluest Fugates, and despite her bruise-like color, she had 13 children of her own and lived to the ripe old age of 84. Ironically, Dr. Madison Kawine, who studied the Fugattis, discovered that an injection of a blue dye called methylene blue was enough to temporarily change the blue color of the affected blood into a normal red color. You've probably had them before, but have you ever wondered what those little whitish lumps in the back of your throat are? Their official name may be tonsil stones, but spoiler alert, they're not actually stones at all. Otherwise known as tonsil calculi or tonsilloliths, these tiny throat invaders are actually made up of debris like food, dead cells, or other substances that become trapped in the crevices of the tonsils before turning hard. Delicious. Although they're usually pretty small, the biggest tonsil stone on record was a whopping 14.5 centimeters and was measured in 1936. Can you imagine the surprise when that bad boy was pulled out? The reason why they smell like the devil's butt crack is because they're home to various anaerobic bacteria which produce foul-smelling sulfides. The bad news is that they're pretty unavoidable, but they can be removed at home with some vigorous gargling and good old oral hygiene. We've all seen them at some point, those little squiggly translucent worms that seem to float across your field of vision. The thing is, they seem to dart away the moment you try and focus on them, which means identifying what they actually are is pretty darn difficult. Rest assured, they're not really alive. They're officially known as eye floaters, and the good news is that you can totally just ignore them. Most floaters are small flecks of a protein called collagen, which is part of a gel-like substance in the back of your eye called the vitreous. As you get older, the protein fibers that make up the vitreous shrink down to little shreds that clump together. The shadows these fibers cast on your retina, which is the light-sensitive tissue at the back of your eye, is what causes the floaters to appear. Floaters can appear at any age, but you're more likely to start noticing them between the ages of 50 to 75. Still, it's better than actually having tiny worms in your eyes. Whether tired, stressed out, or just plain bored, many people resort to the oddly satisfying feeling of rubbing their eyes, but something else happens when we practice this strange behavior. An entire mini galaxy appears. It might seem like you're traveling through space and time, but there's actually a scientific explanation for why you suddenly see stars. These seemingly random shapes and colors are known as phosphenes, and were reported as long ago as the time of the ancient Greeks. You see, rubbing your eyes increases the pressure within the eyeball, and that pressure activates ganglion cells in the retina the same way as light does. Because your brain doesn't know the difference, it interprets this activation as if you were seeing light from the world outside. As a result, you'll likely see tiny blobs of different colors that move and scatter rapidly with the rubbing motion. In other words, that pretty little galaxy is basically your eyeball saying, "Hey dude, you're squishing me." And those eyeballs of yours, they can still blink if your head gets chopped off. You're probably thinking, how do you even know that? Well, my curious companions, we have one man to thank for this intriguing factoid: French chemist Antoine Laurent de Lavoisier. During France's reign of terror in the 18th century, which was characterized by a shedload of guillotine executions, poor old Mr. Lavoisier found himself on the chopping block. What were his crimes? Discovering hydrogen and helping to implement the metric system. Heinous, I know. Being a total nerd, dedicated chemist, Lavoisier decided that his death wouldn't be in vain because there was one last discovery he needed to make. Is it possible to blink after having your head cut off? Having promised that he would try and blink for as long as possible after the blade fell, witnesses claimed that Lavoisier's decapitated head did indeed blink for around 30 seconds. Because more advanced scientific equipment didn't exist back then, de Lavoisier has since been credited for conducting the earliest known study into the brain's independent function. Totally worth it, right? You're sleeping soundly when suddenly you find yourself plummeting off a cliff in your dreams. Seconds before you hit the ground, you jolt yourself awake in cold sweats. But why? This phenomenon actually has a name: a hypnic jerk or sleep start, and it's actually part of our normal sleep processes. Many doctors believe it is just the body twitching as it slowly shuts down to rest, but sleep doctor and clinical psychologist Michael Breus has another theory. According to Breus, we shock ourselves awake when the body goes through the first sleep stage too quickly because it's so exhausted. During this initial stage, which only lasts a few minutes, your breathing and heart rate slows down and your sleep is still very light. But if the body speeds through this stage and shuts down too fast, it might trigger the brain to think that your vitals are actually failing, which explains why it jerks the body awake in response. Because it's so hard to study, there's no definitive answer to the visual component of falling off cliffs or downstairs, but this may be the easiest way for the brain to interpret the rush of the feeling of falling asleep too soon. Next time it happens to you, just remember, your brain probably thought you were dead for a hot minute. The world is full of things that hurt, but nothing compares to the searing pain of stepping on a single Lego brick. There are actually organized events called Lego Walks where people deliberately walk over a path of Legos. Those who have completed one have admitted that Legos hurt way more than hot coals or broken glass. But how is that possible? Well, firewalking involves walking on the embers of logs that have burned for about an hour. And according to seasoned firewalker Scott Bell, although the temperature registers between 930 to 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, that's not actually what you feel when you walk across it. Walking on broken glass is a similar story because the broken pieces are spread evenly over a surface. As you walk across them, your foot distributes weight, which flattens the glass. No single piece of glass pierces the skin or even pokes it hard enough to set off the pain receptors in your foot. Lego, on the other hand, is a totally different story. Lest we forget, these bricks are built to withstand the wrath of an angry toddler. In fact, a single 2x2 brick can withstand up to 4,240 newtons, or 950 pounds of pressure. So when your foot lands on one, all that force is redirected right back. The soles of each foot contains up to 200,000 sensory receptors, so imagine every single one screaming in harmony. It actually hurts less to step on multiple Legos at once because the impact is spread across the foot. So if you must leave a Lego scattered around the floor, at least make sure it's not just one. We all know someone who can't help cracking terrible puns at every opportunity. But what if I told you they might actually be suffering from a debilitating pun disorder known as Witzelschlucht? One of the first noted cases of this pathological joking emerged in the strangest circumstances by the German neurologist Otfried Forster in 1929. Forster was operating on a male patient to remove a tumor. The man was conscious, a common practice at the time, and the moment Forster started manipulating the growth, his patient suddenly erupted into a manic flight of speech, as he recounted pun after awful pun. In the same year, psychiatrist Abraham Burrell reported coming across patients who would joke about anything and everything, even when they weren't on the operating table. Since then, many more cases have been noted. Strangely enough, none of the jokesters seem to find other people funny despite considering themselves to be absolutely hilarious. The link between those who suffer from Witzelschlucht seemed to be some sort of prior damage to the frontal lobes, which could be caused by a stroke or brain hemorrhage. Scientists believe that the network of regions around the frontal lobes are responsible for the same sort of complex analytical thoughts that is required to understand jokes. The brain damage suffered by those with Witzelschlucht seems to disinhibit some of the signaling between those frontal lobes and the pleasure centers responsible for making us laugh. That means they don't find other jokes funny, while their own thoughts and feelings might still trigger the dopamine kick, which makes them giggle at their own jokes. I think it's high time I got myself checked out for Witzelschlucht. It might not have crossed your mind, but unlike other bodily extremities, our eyeballs aren't able to determine coldness or heat, which is down to a lack of temperature receptor cells. In fact, the largest part of the human eye is nestled comfortably inside the skull, where they're constantly pumped with a strong supply of warm blood. As long as they're inside a functioning body with additional bone and tissue and fat to keep them warm, it's virtually impossible for your eyeballs to freeze in sub-zero temperatures. After a day in the sun, your skin will probably be browner or redder if you forgot the sunblock, but your hair will probably turn a shade lighter, and this is all down to the power of sun damage. In both cases, sunlight breaks down melanin, the pigment responsible for the color of hair and skin, but with one key difference. When the sun bleaches and destroys melanin in your hair, it becomes lighter, and since hair isn't a living thing, it'll stay that way until new follicles grow in. On the other hand, skin is equipped to respond to this damage by producing more melanocyte cells, which protect us from harmful UV radiation, darkening our skin. Motion sickness is a frustratingly common ailment, and the nauseating sensation you feel is just a result of mixed signals being sent to your brain, which causes confusion. Your inner ear has a big role to play. Two sacs located in the semicircular canals called the saccule and the utricle contain fluid which tells the brain about any imbalances, which is how we know when we're stood up or lying down. On a boat, for example, your inner ear can sense the rocking of the waves even though your eyes might not be able to see it, causing your brain to try and make these two conflicting feelings agree, which makes us feel queasy. Brain freeze can put a real downer on cold treats like ice cream, and these short-term headaches occur when something extremely cold touches the upper palate or roof of the mouth while rapidly consuming icy food and drink. This kind of stimulus causes vasoconstriction or narrowing of the blood vessels and resulting nerve pain, which is generally alleviated by rewarming the upper palate to widen the blood vessels through vasodilation. Quick fixes like drinking warm water or pressing your tongue to the roof of your mouth can get the blood flowing again and stop the brain freeze. Anyone who's ever been in a hot, crowded place like a subway train knows that people's sweaty armpits can get really stinky really quickly. This is because skin-dwelling bacteria thrive in warm, moist areas like sweaty underarms. As they encounter your sweat, they break down a sweat-specific protein produced by a gene called ABCC11. It's this protein, which is broken down into smelly products called thioalcohols by the bacteria, that causes the nauseating stench of body odor. While decent people solve this nose-pinching problem with a few sprays of deodorant, most Koreans don't need to. That's because even though they sweat, around 99% of the Korean population has a non-functional ABCC11 gene, so they don't produce that all-important protein and in turn don't smell compared to the rest of the world. Scientists believe that being stinky was evolutionarily selected against around areas of East Asia thousands of years ago, meaning that while stinky people died alone, fresh-smelling individuals passed the genes on to their children. Man, this makes me wish I'd been born Korean. I'd save so much money on deodorant and probably have a girlfriend. The old Diet Coke and Mentos experiment. Unscrew the cap, drop in a row of minty candy, and watch as an impressive geyser of soda erupts into the air like a volcano that has been dormant for many years. The science behind it is pretty simple. Although the Mentos look smooth, they actually have a rough outer coating which breaks the bonds between the carbon dioxide gas and water in the Diet Coke, creating carbon dioxide bubbles which causes the eruption. Thankfully, it's just an urban myth that the same reaction can happen inside your body. That's because the rough coating on the candy starts to dissolve pretty much as soon as you put it onto your tongue. Putting Mentos into your stomach and then chugging a glass of Coke would most likely just result in a particularly wicked bout of burping. The only danger there lies in the fact that some people might not be able to belch enough to release the gas before the pressure gets too much. In that case, you might end up with some nasty stomach aches or, in a worst case scenario, a small rupture. But that's pretty unlikely because most people would vomit before that ever happened. Trying to gobble down the Mentos and Coke at the same time and holding the mixture in your mouth will probably just cause you to spew out foaming Coke all over the place. So no, it won't kill you. But it's still a stupid idea. Whether it's that one scene in your favorite movie, overwhelming joy, or the crushing pain of high school heartbreak, it's not hard to set us off in a flood of salty tears. But why do we do it? Crying can be scientifically defined as the shedding of tears in response to an emotional state. The non-emotional shedding of tears even has its own name, lacrimation. It all has to do with the biological processes of the lacrimal system, which comprised of a secretory system that produces your tears and an excretory system that drains them. When a tear is produced from the lacrimal gland that sits in between your eyeball and eyelid, you spontaneously blink, which spreads the tear across the eye as a thin film of liquid. Ever wondered why your nose runs when you cry? That's because the tears you have just produced usually drains neatly off down the lacrimal punctum, which is like a sink plug, before draining through your nose. But when you're having a real good cry, the lacrimal drainage system can't deal with the large incoming volume of tears and they end up cascading over your eyelids and down your cheeks. We actually produce 3 different types of tear. These are known as basal, reflex, and psychic tears. Your basal tears keep your cornea nourished and lubricated, while reflex tears help to wash out any irritations from foreign particles or vapors. When you suddenly cry while cutting onions, you are producing reflex tears. Psychic or crying tears are the ones we produce in response to strong emotions like sadness, anger, pleasure, or physical pain. These tears even contain a natural painkiller called leucine enkephalin, which could explain why people say a good cry makes everything better. Go forth and weep, my bros. Farting is a fact of life, but we all know it isn't considered acceptable in most social settings, which means everyone has had to perfect the art of holding one in at some point. At the grocery store, during class, walking down the aisle on your wedding day, you name it. How long can you keep it all bottled up until the cork pops off? When your body needs to get rid of natural gas buildup, there are 2 ways it can come out, either as a belch or as flatulence that escapes via the back door. Burping is usually caused by something known as air aphasia, which results from the air you swallow while talking or chewing gum, but farting is a little more complex. Sometimes bacteria or food ferments in the stomach, leading to acidity and gas. People who suffer from intolerances like lactose or gluten are also bigger farters, but even those with stronger stomachs can have trouble digesting cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and asparagus. Believe it or not, you pass gas 10 to 20 times a day, sometimes without even realizing it. No matter how hard you try to clench those buns, the floodgates will inevitably open when you get distracted by something else. Fart holding might not be particularly harmful, but be warned, any sort of buildup in your lower gastrointestinal tract will eventually push upward and cause bloating, discomfort, and even trapped wind in your midsection. Exploding like a cartoon character is also unlikely, but there is one exception that refers to people with obstructions in their colons. According to Dr. Lisa Ganju at NYU Langone Medical Center, an obstructed colon can blow up like a balloon because of the blockage to the point where it could even burst. To be on the safe side, follow the age-old advice, better out than in. Speaking of, ever found yourself in a tricky situation where you realize you need to poop at the most inconvenient moment? Maybe you're trapped in a car during a long desert road trip, or you've just arrived at a hot date's place for dinner. If you concentrate hard enough, you even might be able to hold it for so long that it feels like it has disappeared altogether. But just how long should you hold your poop? It might be a taboo subject, but pooping is essential to help flush harmful toxins out of the body. After you eat, it takes about 6 to 8 hours for food to pass through your stomach and small intestine. From there, it enters your large intestine, aka the colon, for further digestion, absorption of water, and finally, the elimination of undigested food. The colon is about 5 feet long and 3 inches in diameter, and it takes about 36 hours for food to move through the entire thing. All in all, it takes a grand total of 2 to 5 days for food to be digested and turned into poop, depending on the individual. It's not actually essential to go for a number 2 every day. In fact, a normal poop schedule can range from 3 times a day to 3 times a week. But going several days without dropping off any timber or deliberately holding it in could cause all sorts of problems. When stool hits part of the rectum, it sends a signal to your brain telling you that you probably need to unload it. According to Nikit Paul, an assistant clinical professor at New York's Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine, it's pretty hard to hold poop anyway because you have to tighten the powerful voluntary sphincters. Even when you think your poop has suddenly disappeared, there's a chance it may actually have become impacted as you become more and more constipated. And the longer it stays, the harder it gets. Eventually, your stomach might look permanently bloated as the pressure builds so much that it's impossible to hold flat. You'll probably need laxatives to help relieve the blockage, or, in worst-case scenarios, it may even need to be manually removed by a medical professional. Paul admits that he's never heard of anyone literally exploding or dying from fatal poop holding, but the embarrassment of removal should be enough to put you off. But what about when you need to take a leak? Holding your pee is an art form that takes practice, and the more you think about it, the more you need to go. But just how long can you hold on until you literally burst? The truth is, how long you can hold your pee varies greatly from person to person. It all comes down to bladder control. The bladder is the organ that receives urine from the kidneys via thin muscular tubes called the ureters. The bladder is muscular and expandable. It fills with urine as the kidneys continually filter the liquid until it reaches full capacity. At that point, fibers that are designed to detect a stretch in the bladder send signals to the brain which say, "Hey, you need to pee, buddy." When you finally reach the restroom to relieve yourself, your brain tells the bladder to contract, which squeezes the urine, causing it to travel to the urethra and out of the body. Your bladder actually expands to change size as you grow older. For example, the average person's bladder between the ages of 11 to 15 can hold between 165 to 225 milliliters. But an adult bladder can hold up to 300 to 400 milliliters of pee. Typically, a person pees about 8 times each day and no more than 1 a night after hitting the sack. How much and how often you pee depends on how much you drink and other factors like convenience, but you should aim to go at least every 3 to 4 hours. Basically, you should never intentionally hold your pee longer than you have to. Walking around with a full bladder could result in bladder dysfunction, risk of UTIs, or damage to the urinary tract structures. In some rare cases, it's even possible for a person's bladder to rupture due to deliberate urinary retention. It's true what they say, when you gotta go, you gotta go. Have you ever glanced down at your fingernails and noticed some bizarre white markings that weren't there before? This kind of discoloration is actually a common condition known as leukonychia. Most of the time, it doesn't signify anything serious, and there are a number of potential causes. The primary reason is as a result of injury to the nail bed, which can occur if you accidentally strike or pinch your nail. Because of the time it takes your fingernails to grow, you might not even recall the injury by the time any white spots show up. Leukonychia can also appear as an allergic reaction to cosmetic products like polish, gloss, hardener, or nail polish remover. Sometimes it can also mean your nails are deficient in certain minerals or vitamins, most commonly zinc or calcium. But unless your entire nail turns white and you experience any pain, these markings will usually go away on their own, so there's no need to worry. Did you know that a baby's body has about 300 bones at birth compared to the 206 bones that adults have? Over time, the process of smaller pieces fusing together reduces the number of bones in the body. One seemingly crucial thing babies aren't born with is kneecaps. Instead, babies are born with pieces of cartilage that will eventually become a bony kneecap or patella. Cartilage, which can be found in the nose, ears, and joints, is flexible and gives structure where it's needed in the body. Most children's kneecaps begin to ossify, that is, turn from cartilage into bone, between the ages of 2 and 6. Often, several pieces of cartilage will begin to harden into bone at the same time until the kneecap is one complete bone by the age of about 10 or 12. Being born with kneecaps could make the birthing process more difficult or could even result in birth injuries because bone is rigid and less flexible than cartilage. Isn't the human body smart? And now that you're a whole lot smarter, that's all for today. Let me know down below which of these insane facts left you amazed, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.